Hey, happy Memorial's Day. It's Nick Allis with Program Practical with today's video on blocks in Ruby. So I really wanted to go over today blocks in Ruby. There'll be a subsequent blog post on blocks, procs, and lambdas as well on programpractical.com. But it was a very interesting thing coming into for Ruby was blocks. You hear a lot, one of the big features touted in Ruby are blocks. And when you first getting into it, you're kind of like, well, what's so special about blocks? They kind of just seem like replacement for curly brackets. But there's a lot of very cool things you can do, especially with the yield operator. I wanted to jump into that today. All right, so we'll start with an example real quick in case you're new to blocks and not too sure what they might be, or just give you a quick refresher. We'll do it with a little range here with the each method. And so the first one usually sits within a do in brackets or do in tags like this. And then there's also the syntax of a single line inside a curly brackets like this. And when we execute that, you'll see we get 2 loops of 5. So in my initial exposure, I'm like, okay, well, so this is essentially a way just to write a function like in any other language, or not function, but if I was to do a for loop in like JavaScript, I would have something like this, and to me, that's all what do and in was doing. I didn't realize what was actually going on in the back end. And that is, there's a special tag called yield, which actually allows you to execute the code. So it's not just like saying, for this loop, do this. I mean, it is, but there is more going on behind the scenes. So, for example, when you provide a code block to your method call, you can yield control of that block that's currently being executed or suspend execution of that current method to go back to your original method, execute some code, and then jump back into the code you were executing. So it actually provides you a lot of very good power when it comes to like, well, I want to write this method, but midway through this method call, I really have some, code that is going to change based on the use, or just depending on what's happening at that time, some code's going to have to change. Or, when I implement it on this system, some things are going to have to be different at this point in time. And I don't want to write 2 method calls. Instead, you use a yield tag to actually yield control of that method back to your original stuff, do some things, and then you jump back to your original code, and we're going to show that off. We'll write our own little thing that does a yield and kind of show how that's done. So in one of the most basic examples we could do, we'll make a definition, and we're just going to say, what are we going to call it? Just are you there? Super simple. And it's going to make a call. Are you there? And then we're going to yield the control. And we're just going to end our method there. Nothing fancy. But now we can do the call, are you there? And then we can give it some code. So I can say, yes, oops, yeah, like so. We'll save that. Jump back over to our shell and run this. And as you can see, it asks, are you there? And then our block implements its own code saying, yes, I am here. And then it jumps back and finishes the execution. So you can see how this is really good for modular code and code that you want to make sure is very pluggable into other systems and people can use based on how they need it. All right, so for example, we can take this step further as well. And we'll make a new method called my name is, and we'll pass in, we'll yield control. We'll yield control, but this time when we yield control, I'm going to give it a name for myself. We'll just call it Frank. And then just to show that once again, we're back to our initial call. And we'll end our call. We'll do my name is, and I'll just go ahead and give it my name. And then we're gonna call a name back. Yep, and name that. All right. So if this works right, it should say, hey, Nick, and then yield back to me, which then will say, nice to see you again, Frank. And then goes back to them saying, lovely weather today. Good old small talk. So, of course, we have our original code up here that's still fired off. But yes, there is the, hey, Nick, and it's nice to see you again, Frank. Lovely weather today. So you can actually see the power in this and the ability to dynamically hand things back and forth. And, you know, yes, the methods can even hand things back. I think that will be our last example. All right. So we're just going to do a quick class where we're just going to add a couple numbers together, hand it back over to our code that's working, and then have it manipulate the numbers and hand things back. So we'll change that before that becomes an issue. Okay. I'm going to get rid of these other lines so we don't mess up all of our output. So it's going to hand back and say, hey, I believe the sum to this is this. And I'm going to say, well, you know, here. Make it a little bit easier on myself. I'm going to hand back a sum. Yeah, we'll do that. We'll do a nice little back and forth like that. Way to fire that off. So this is this right, and it's going to be just 2 and 2. But this first time, I'm just going to straight up ignore the sum, or well, I'll take the here. We'll do the sum plus equals 1. We'll add 1 to the sum, which in this case will mean we'll be returning 5, and then we'll do it one more time. And this will be 3 and 1. And we're just going to return the sum. I'm not even going to mess with it. I'm just going to straight up return what it handed me. And we'll save that. So this first one we should get back. I'm sorry, you must be crazy. And then the second one will be, I agree. So we'll jump back to here. Clear this out. All right, and then the first one, I believe the sum is 4. I'm sorry, you must be crazy. And then I believe the sum is 4, and I agree. So with that, you know, it shows the dynamicness of this, right? So we are able to pass in variables on the get-go. It can do things. We can yield control back to the method that was originally in control when this was called, which at that point we can do things if we want, and then even return answers back to the method that called the yield. which then it can handle its own line of logic based on those results. And this is why blocks are so cool, in my opinion, and why I think a lot of people go on about the power of blocks. And this isn't it either. There's still lambdas and procs, which are in a way similar. Like I said, though, there'll be a blog post on that today. I'll have the link to that in the description below that goes into those as well. Plus, tons of sources online also already have those kind of type ups as well. Highly recommend looking into it. Anyways, this is all for me today. Once again, it's Nick Aulis at Program Practical. Go ahead and like this video if you liked it, disliked if you don't. If you have any comments, suggestions, or questions, leave them in the comments below.